Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Anna Kelley. Thanks for being on the show, Anna.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's an honor to have you on the show. Anna and I were just talking about, I think it was 2 years ago, we were speaking at an event together and I just heard part of her amazing story then and said, man, she's going to be a great guest for the show one day, but she's going to do big things, even better than that. She has an amazing mission that I'm looking forward to hearing more about today and really just sharing with the listeners. I think it's great to expose yourself a little bit to others that are pushing with a bigger mission than just financial success. But we'll get into that. But she's a full-time real estate investor, active ownership in 1,200 doors. She grew up in Section 8 housing and through real estate created financial freedom for herself and her family. Through her multifamily syndication, she now focused on going beyond financial returns to creating meaningful impact in the lives of the people living in her communities. And welcome to the show. I know you have such an impactful story and just really path to getting to where you're at now. I'd love to hear some about that. I know it's going to affect the listeners and they are going to learn a lot from you. I know even from as young as you want to go back, because I know you have such an amazing story. I'd love for you to share a little bit that will impact the listeners. And then let's move up to how you're making such a meaningful impact. And probably more people now than you ever imagined, through all your residents.
Yeah, absolutely, Whitney. I started out, my parents divorced when I was very young, and my earliest memory, really, I was about 6 years old and we left Pasadena, Texas, right outside of Houston in the middle of the night. My mom was pregnant, me and my sister, and she was leaving an abusive marriage and, violence and tears. And I just remember being up in the middle of the night, driving back to San Antonio, where she was from, to start life over. And we, slept on my grandparents' couch, and she eventually found a job as a leasing agent in an apartment complex. And so we moved into this Section 8 apartment complex. My mom was the leasing agent, single mom, and she worked also at night. She waitressed at night just to make ends meet and to be able to provide for us as a single mom fleeing an abusive relationship. And growing up in Section 8 housing, it was tough. We lived in a nicer area, but we lived in the projects of the area. And so, there was drugs, there was violence, fights, those kind of things. And that's all I really saw was that kind of lifestyle in poverty and fend for yourself. And, my mom had this resilience to work 2 jobs and do whatever it took to make ends meet and provide for her kids. But it was a really hard lifestyle. And one of the things that I saw, because I did go to a good school, I saw other families who had, a cohesive family unit, who had a mother and father who both worked, and they seemed to have it all, right? So from the outside looking in, I thought the solution is I need to make sure I get a good job, get a degree, and can take care of myself and be independent so that I'm never dependent on a man to take care of me if he ended up being abusive. And of course, that's not all I think about today, but it really framed me as a person to think about how can I get an education, beat the cycle of poverty, change what the outcome is going to look like for me. And that really got me down the path of, working hard, getting good grades, getting a degree. And I did that. I was very determined, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out of this. And I landed myself after college. I worked full-time while I went to school full-time, graduated in 3 years, and came out and was offered a job for Bank of America to go through their private banking and financial advisory program and to advise their ultra high net worth clients in their bank. And that was the first time in my young 20s that I really knew anything about money. And I'm like, I don't know even how to budget my own, checking account. And I'm going to start talking to people about how to, what to do with their money when they have it. But I'm so thankful that I had that because it really opened my eyes to there's a lot of people that know how to manage their money. And if I really want to do well, it's not just about getting a good job and making good money, but I got to figure out how to manage my money well and invest my money so that one day, I'll really have this independence and be able to provide better for my own family, to not ever have to end up in, battered women's shelters and relatives' couches and things like that. So that's kind of my beginning and how I got started into thinking about investing. But it was several years further before I started thinking about real estate.
So it's interesting how upbringings like that, and it affects everyone, right? And I mean, all of us have stories or things that have happened to us, but such an experience at a young age can definitely just change the whole trajectory of where you're headed, right? And for you became very determined. It's interesting just to hear that. I can relate somewhat, especially through military and law enforcement and just training like that. And it sounds like yours, is a very different story, but can become very determined depending on how what happens to us, right? And
right.
For you, man, you were very determined. You were very successful. You got into Bank of America. Now you're working with extremely high net worth individuals. Tell us, what are a couple of things? It's just interesting working with high net worth individuals from that capacity. A couple of things that you took from that have helped you in the apartment syndication business.
Yeah, so many things, because that was just kind of the beginning. But what was really interesting, I remember I started out in private banking in the late 90s. And so I had this client back then, interest rates were high, and what kind of returns were in the stock market and in annuities and CDs, they were all pretty high, much higher than what they are today. And I remember having a conversation with an older gentleman, and you have to realize I was like 23 years old and this young blonde thing. And this older man's looking at me like, honey, you got so much to learn, but I'll listen to your spiel, And I told him about these returns we can make. I remember it was in the teens, but I don't remember the number. But he laughed and he said, I make much more than that in my real estate investments. And I'm like, real estate investments? I've never heard of real estate investments. I've gone through all this training and I can tell you about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, annuities, life insurance, et cetera. But nobody taught me about real estate. So that kind of piqued my interest to think, I need to learn more about this real estate thing. And about a year later, I realized I'm throwing away a lot of money on rent. And I thought, I'm going to not throw my money away on rent. I think I'm going to buy a condo because I can live in it for free, or basically something that's an investment. And then down the road, I'll keep it as a rental property to bring in a little extra income, because he had rentals. So it just gave me that little bit of info that said, wait a second, these really wealthy people don't just invest in the retail things that I know about, but they also think outside the box and invest in real estate. So that was one thing. The other thing that I really took away that I think really helps me as an investor to get to where I am today, as well as now as an operator and syndicator, is that I don't just think about, I need a building of a certain size or a certain number of units, or I've just got to get any deal that my investors will like. I really think of all investments from an investment strategy standpoint. Through our lifetimes, we go through phases of, initially we need income. And so we're in the business of wealth accumulation, cash flowing things, right? Then eventually we move to a place where we want to focus on growth, and we can take a little more risk. We can set some money aside, not necessarily the bucket of money that we need to live on day to day. And then eventually we have to start really thinking about preserving and protecting what we've built, right? So as an investor, learning those things through my training, as well as working with people that were in each different phase of that financial trajectory of growing wealth and financial freedom, has allowed me to really look at investments with a lens of, do I really want to do this deal? What are my personal financial goals? Where am I in that, trajectory of financial growth? And where are my investors? And how can I marry the right opportunities to actually meet the financial goals that we're trying to achieve, rather than just buy a deal because it has a good IRR and I hope that there's some upside? So I think those were my main two takeaways.
No, that's awesome, because I think you can speak very well to passive investors and also people in this business, that are trying to get started as a syndicator. Yes. I wanted to say, thinking differently about personal financial goals, right? You mentioned that, but also just thinking through your investors' goals and your own, and being strategic. You mentioned about it, instead of just trying to get a deal done. I think by reaching that financial freedom number, right? Whatever that is for yourself, you reaching that just really changes the whole ball game, right? For yourself, allows you to think differently, allows you to do things differently. And I would say let's back up to getting to that financial number a little bit. The passive investor listening, a couple tips that maybe you can share that helped you reach that number for you and your family. What was that? Maybe, and was it before you became a syndicator?
Yes, it actually was, Whitney. So, when I had a child in 2007, I had been this very driven person. As I told you, I moved up with the bank and then I left there and went to work for AIG, working to develop, products for ultra high net worth individuals, like offshore hedge funds, literally syndications, onshore and offshore, with lots of risk, but lots of upside. And so I was very driven. I'm just going to keep going up this corporate ladder, and then save a bunch of money and start investing it. But when I had my first baby, everything changed. All I wanted to do, Whitney, was be home with that baby, whatever it took. And I couldn't, because at this point I had a really good 6-figure income. My husband had just come out of chiropractic college, and he was making like a third of what I was as an associate doctor with a 6-figure school loan, not unlike many people today. And so, we got caught in that trap of we need a house before we have a baby. So we had a house payment and a school loan bigger than our house payment, a car payment, and then this baby. And I had a 6-figure income I couldn't let go of. And it broke my heart. And I thought, I have to figure out a way now to leave my job, but still make money so that I can be home with this baby. And at that time, I was on bed rest and I was watching a lot of HGTV. It was the first year or two that all the flipping houses shows started coming out. And so I convinced myself that flipping houses was the way to do it. So with a 3-month-old baby, we bought our first house flip. We sat on it for a year. This was late 2007, right before the crash in 2008. And we lost money. And my husband said, we are never doing that again. But it was the first time I kind of thought about real estate, right? So after that, he said, no house flipping. We can wait to do real estate till we've, replaced your income. So we thought entrepreneurship is the way to go. And we relocated from Texas, where I'm from. We moved to Pennsylvania for my husband to start his chiropractic business, because I thought if he can just do really well in a year or two, I can leave and I can be home with my kiddos. Well, the economy crashed in 2008. I work for AIG, so my job was on the chopping block. We were told weekly, start looking for jobs. We're probably going to be sold. I was in one of the big divisions that almost went under. And the only thing that was going well, Whitney, was I had just bought a year before when we moved here, a 4-unit apartment building. And we decided, let's not buy a big house when we're starting a business with lots of debt. Let's buy this little 4-unit building, live in one of the units, and the other 3 units will cover our expenses. So that was the first real, purposeful multifamily investment we bought. But we bought it just to be safe and smart, not because we thought this is the path to financial freedom. It was going to be entrepreneurship, right? Well, when AIG almost went down, I realized I work for one of the largest companies in the entire world, and it's not safe. I lost a significant portion of my 401k, between 2/3 and 3/4 of my 401 during that whole crash, because I was heavily invested in financial stocks that I thought were safe. And I decided to pull what I had left, and I borrowed it from myself and bought another little 4-unit, because I thought if I lose my job, I'll have to pay taxes on the 401k, but I can create another $1,200 a month in income from this little 4-unit building and cover the cost of diapers, because I found out I was pregnant with baby number 3 the same week that AIG was going under. And we just prayed and thought, what are we going to do? And so I bought those 2 4-unit buildings, and they kept doing really well during this, recession and major financial collapse. And I realized if I ever want to be home with my kids, I have to take my finances under my own control and figure it out. And so I put everything aside that I had learned. Don't ever get out of your 401k. Don't liquidate. I'm like, these companies aren't coming back. They're toast, right? So it just opened my eyes that entrepreneurship wasn't the way for us. A big corporate job wasn't the way for us. My 401k wasn't the way for us. Real estate was what we wanted to do. And basically, Whitney, what we did at that point is we made a plan and we said, as long as we can figure out how to get loans, because at that point properties were abundant, but money was really hard, especially for someone who worked for AIG and husband had hundreds of thousands in business startup debt. And we said, we're just going to keep buying rental properties. So we made the decision not to buy a house, to stay in our little 4-unit building. And every time we had extra money, we flipped properties to get cash so that we could put them down on new properties. We would continue to buy enough small multifamily properties to replace my 6-figure income, and I would retire. And that's exactly what we did.
So many things we could talk about there, but a couple things that I hear, you say, I mean, just so many hard decisions there, right? Especially, you're now a family, you have 1 or 2 children. At the time you're buying the 4-unit, already bought the 4-unit. And now you have to make a decision to, the hard decision, right? You're going to move into one of the units. So that was something I was striving to do at one time as a family, and it was difficult, right? It was difficult to even find a place that I was willing to move the family into, right? And so I can relate somewhat, but what's 1 or 2 things maybe you learned that you didn't expect by moving your whole family? And it's different when you're single. You're 20, somebody's trying to house hack. Okay, that's not really that too much strain on your family. After you have kids and a spouse and all these things that are in the play as well. But what are 1 or 2 things that you learned, maybe even as a family unit, by house hacking? At that point in your life, your career, family.
Absolutely. So, because I grew up in Section 8 housing, I really felt that what's most important is that our family stay together, and that we focus on our family. And I knew contentment, whether I had little or whether I had much, right? So I started in Section 8 housing, but before we moved to Pennsylvania, we had a beautiful big home, and we both, we had good money coming in, and I enjoyed that much better than living in Section 8 housing. But I also knew a lot about risk, right? So during the year that we flipped that first house in 2007, my husband lost a job, and we had 2 mortgages, a car payment, a school loan, and 1 job. And that was a very difficult year. And it taught us a lot about debt, right? And so I learned through that process that the borrower is truly the slave to the lender, as Dave Ramsey says, and that we needed to be very, very careful. So that's what, knowing that we needed to decrease our living expenses and live below our means so that we could work to expand our means. That was what I knew I had to do. And so I said, we can do anything for a year or 2. I've lived in apartments my whole life. We can be happy and content. We just have to realize that we're taking a step back in order to wisely move forward. And at that time, when I moved here, AIG had not a single employee that worked from home. They wouldn't allow it. They told me no when I asked them if I could work from home. But right as I was leaving, they said, we really need you. We'll let you try it. So I did that because I knew that my job wasn't a guarantee, and that he was starting a business with hundreds of thousands in debt. And it was just the smart thing to do. And I'm so glad that we did it, because if we had a big house when everything hit the fan, we would have been in a lot more trouble. But we really learned the value of contentment. We really did. I had lived poor. Then I had gone to Russia and worked with the poorest of the poor orphanages there. And I realized how blessed I was, even being a poor American growing up. And so I've just never needed the stuff to feel content. And living in that apartment for 2 years taught me, I still don't need the stuff to be content. I've had it, but I'd rather be home with my babies with little than working full time, having all this stuff and not being able to really be close to my family.
I could not agree more. I think it's interesting. Right away, you said, we focused on what was most important, and that was the family staying together, even if that meant some hard decisions. And I think it hurts our pride, right? When we have to sell the big place to do what we know is best, and maybe move into an apartment. Other people's opinions start coming in your way, right? Whether it's family or friends, and telling you how crazy you are. But you know what? They're not saying that now. That's for sure.
Right. Right.
And so I want to get to, though, because we're going to be running low on time so quick, unfortunately, but I want to get to this mission now, from your upbringing, some hard knocks, of course, and hard decisions that you and your family have had to make have pushed you now to really be on a mission. Even your success, gaining the financial freedom, pushing, being so determined to do that has now allowed you to do some bigger things and helping so many other people. Shed some light on the mission behind how you're able to help so many of your residents now.
Yeah, Whitney, so those small decisions led me ultimately to realize that I could create wealth very slowly, very carefully, very strategically if I made the right, wise financial decisions. And so, we, for several years, we ended up renting a house for a little bit, and then kept just investing in other properties. So we continued to think about how do we live below our means while we work to expand our means. And ultimately it took a long time, but 2 years and 2 days ago, I retired from AIG after 20 years. And at that point, I'm like, we really have created financial freedom to where if I never go back to work a day in my life, we will never have to worry about money again. And we did that with the really small apartment buildings, no syndication, no joint ventures, just the small stuff. But I knew as I was getting ready to retire, when I retire, now my kids are in school, right? So my dream was to be home with them while they were little. And God didn't allow it to work out that way, right? For many unknown reasons. But now I know there's a greater reason, right? So when I retired and my kids are in school, I had to sit back and go, well, what do I want to do with my day every day? And I've had a passion from the time I was little, and inner city youth ministries poured into us and poured into me in my apartments and took us to church. And then I started working with inner city kids and an organization called Hope for Youth in Texas. And we had financial literacy programs. We had, how do you do a budget? We had classes on how do you put together a resume? How do you apply for colleges? How do you apply for jobs? Young mentorship programs for young single teenage moms. And I just loved that. I loved giving back. And I thought one day I want to be able to really impact young children and women in these apartment communities the way people have impacted me. So I realized that now I have the abilities to start doing that. And I just got to figure out how. And that's when I realized, through 20 years of investing, working with high net worth investors and becoming a high net worth investor, I now have a network of people that if we just buy bigger apartments, we can really go in and impact our residents. So for me, starting syndication was never about, I need more and I need to make big chunks of cash and I need more money. I never needed more. I desire more, but really so that I can make a bigger impact. And so today, really, I'm very blessed that I don't have to do another deal just to feed my family. And so if I'm going to do deals and I'm going to spend 30 hours a week working while my kids are at school, I want to do deals that are really going to make an impact on this world. And so I'm looking for deals. I started a company called Greater Purpose Capital, where we're really looking to invest and bring in other investors who have the same heart to impact other people while they're making returns on their money. And then we're going in and buying apartment communities, not just looking at the financial return for our investor, but taking a tiny sliver of that and putting it into operations in a way that we can create some of these programs, partner with community organizations and churches that'll come in and pour into the lives of our residences. So that's really where my heart is and the goal for just about every deal that I do at this point.
No, I love that. And I've seen that personally, just when you have a mission that's bigger than just financial success, it's neat to see how people can get behind that, right? It's something they really want to be a part of. How have you seen that affect, say, how your investors want to partner with you?
They're definitely very interested. I think so many of us, there's so many things going on in this world and we want to make a difference. We want to unify behind a really good mission and goal and supporting humanity, right? And so as I've talked to people and shared my story and talked about what I'm doing, I have a lot of investors who they're like, count me in. It's just a matter of finding the right deals that both make financial sense, protect my investors during a recession. And sometimes those deals aren't the ones where people need you the most, right? Because sometimes these class C-D properties really need people to impact them. But there's a lot of rough things that go on as an investor that gives you a little more risk, right? So right now it's really a matter of balancing, where there's a need with the investors who have the appetite and the heart for that, and then going out and finding the right properties. And it doesn't have to be those properties. I really look for properties that are kind of like the one I grew up in, where the area is nice, but it happens to be the projects of the area that just needs people to come in and pour into them. So it's exciting, and my investors are really excited as well.
All right, Anna, just a few final questions, just quickly. But how do you prepare for a downturn?
I have lived through a downturn, and because I've lived through a downturn, I'm very, very, very careful about how I invest. The biggest thing is knowing your fundamentals and sticking through them through ups and downs, and not varying from what you know is wise just because you think you've got to find a deal. And I know it's easier for me because I've created that financial freedom already. I don't have people that I'm employing that are depending on me. I got to find that next deal, right? But the biggest thing is I do not use bridge debt. When we are in a high of a market and coming down toward a recession, which I thought we were about the end of 2018, but it just took a little long to kind of teeter over the edge. I started really only investing in properties that are in Class B areas that are going to be recession resilient because they have a lot of jobs in the area, a lot of industry diversity, and generally speaking, above average income. So that in and of itself is really financial protection and recession resistance. The other thing is not using bridge debt, only locking in, low interest, good financing. If it doesn't pencil for Fannie and Freddie, I'm not doing the deal during a recession. I'm just not going to take that level of risk. And the other thing is really being very conservative. Everyone says, Whitney, we're conservatively underwriting these deals, right? But they're making their rent bumps 4% and their expenses 2%, their exit cap's the same. And if they do bridge debt, they think when they refi in 2 years, their rate's going to be the same. And that is a disaster waiting to happen if the recession gets worse and lasts longer. So for me, I just look for deals where I'm going to be able to say, even if I just kept it exactly the same as it is today, and I couldn't push rents and I couldn't do my value add plan that I want, I know this thing is still going to cash flow. I'm still going to meet the mortgage debt, and I'm still eventually going to have some upside. I'm just going to hold on to the assets a little longer than the typical syndicator does.
No, that's awesome. We never want to be made to sell, right?
Right.
We want to have some flexibility.
Yes.
What about any predictions that you have in the real estate market over the next 6 to 12 months?
It's really tough. The one thing I've learned, Whitney, is the older I get, the more that there is that I still don't know, right? So I could try to sound smart, and I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. But what the one red herring out there that we really don't know is what's the government going to do to fix things when it starts to collapse. And so I thought when the pandemic hit, this is going to be really, really bad. Banks are going to close. Mortgage companies are going to close. There's going to be mass foreclosures. But the government kept putting in stopgaps to stop it, right? So we've seen that they're willing to pull out the stops to try to keep the economy from collapsing. I do believe that if the tax code changes and the capital gains go up to 39.5% plus 4% for Medicaid, and the 1031 exchange goes away, I think that that's going to cause some significant rumblings in property values for a while. And we're going to have to kind of shift gears as to what we buy, right, in order to make sure we still have the tax advantages. So that's something that I'm really looking at very carefully. Again, I love big multifamily, but I also invest in short-term rentals and small multifamily and smaller single family because I'm all about diversity and having some diversification so that if one asset class is hit really hard, we've still got some things in other asset classes to kind of protect these ups and downs in the market. So I think it's going to get a bit worse before it gets better, but America's strong. I'm still investing. I'm investing for the long term, but I do think that rates are going to go up. And if rates go up and the tax benefits going away, I think you'll see some decreases in value of multifamily. And I'm going to be a buyer at that point, not be one that's forced to sell at that point.
What about any daily habits that you are disciplined about that have helped you achieve success?
Honestly, reading the Bible and praying is honestly what I credit everything to. And because of that, if you read Proverbs, there's so much wisdom about dealing with money and how to make wise financial choices, how to make wise choices for your family, how to make wise choices in who you partner with. that's where I really glean my wisdom. And I just pray for God to help me to make wise decisions, to shut doors where I shouldn't walk, and to open doors where I should. And I really plan. I'm definitely a planner. I don't just live every day kind of frivolously. I say, what do I want to do in the next couple of years? Now, how can I back into every single day doing at least one thing that helps me to grow in each area that I say is important to me? My spiritual health, my relational health, my physical health, and then my real estate. And so I think those are my keys to success.
What's your best source for meeting new investors?
Primarily social media right now, because I haven't been, I was speaking at a lot of events before the shutdown. And with that, I've primarily, done a lot of online events and some books. I've been in a couple of books recently, and people get their hands on it and want to invest with me. So mostly social media, some speaking events, and some books.
And how do you like to give back?
Really, primarily two things. So I coach students. And again, I don't do it for the money, because I can make much more money doing my bigger multifamily deals. But I love pouring into especially women who have kids and they're trying to do the same thing that I did. I really coach people how do you get started and just start creating the financial freedom of some additional passive income. Might be active income in the beginning, but coaching really is one of the things. And the other thing is really making impactful investments, really giving back to our residents. Through the pandemic, even though it was tough, it was such a blessing to be able to give tenants discounts if they pay on time, help them to navigate how do you apply for unemployment, how do you apply for PPP, bringing in organizations in our community that would bring kids lunch while their parents were out working. Those kind of things, just the little things that you can do for your tenants when they're having a hard time, is something that just brings me tremendous joy.
And an amazing show, just an amazing story that I know that is impacting many listeners amongst many residents as well. I mean, it's just incredible, the ripple effect, right? When you're willing to put yourself out there, you're willing to care about others, and congratulations just on your success personally and your family, and really having the most important things first. It sounds like to me. I think you and I would agree on so many fronts, but just really being willing to share your story, some hard stuff, right?
Yeah.
From your way back to even personal family, some hard decisions that had to be made that if hadn't have been made, man, you would be in such a different place right now. It's just incredible to hear, how the Lord works and how he does close doors and open others, and how he helped you to make some hard decisions or your whole family in some crucial times that have now helped you to help so many other people. Right. And so just thank you for sharing that story, and just the importance of being mission minded and being strategic and all those things. Tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
Sure. Great. So my website is greaterpurposecapital.com. On Facebook and LinkedIn, I'm Anna, REI Mom Kelley. So REI for real estate, mom, because it's like my number one job, right? And those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.